On the eastern front of Ukraine, a Russian soldier crouches down in his foxhole as AI-directed smart artillery pinpoints his exact location and adds him to the list of potential targets. Across the world in the US, Amazon employees are monitored and their behavior is logged. Later analysis will reveal how their managers can squeeze as much productivity out of them as possible. Meanwhile in the UK, a local police department is using software to monitor the community they're meant to protect. They'll build a wider view of problem areas while also creating specific profiles on the people most likely to commit crimes. So what links all of these things together? The data analysis giants known as Palantir, whose software models are embedded in every level of society. And who's really pulling the strings there? Well, it's time to introduce you to the main characters behind this new Orwellian takeover, starting with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel can trace his multi-billion-dollar fortune and his immense levels of power to his founding role in PayPal. Thiel was at the heart of the so-called PayPal Mafia. You might know some of the other members, the creators of LinkedIn, the co-founders of YouTube, the CEO of Yelp, or even Elon Musk. Now, lots of future technocrats involved with PayPal learned key lessons at the company, lessons which taught them how to make far more money from their own endeavors later on. As the one CEO of PayPal and one of its biggest shareholders, Thiel was a central figure and he was no different. Of course, Thiel has been well known as a visionary investor for quite some time, with a lot of his reputation coming down to how he was the very first person to invest in Facebook. His $500,000 angel investment was estimated to have been sold for over $1 billion when he finally left the company. However, for years, Thiel was also certain that underwater homes were going to take off and he put millions into companies pushing these pipe dreams. So they weren't all winners as you'd expect. But at PayPal though, Thiel learned about the importance of data and data analysis.
Everything you do on an unsecured network is at risk. Your passwords, credit card info, and even sensitive work documents could be exposed to prying eyes. Now more than ever, is it important to protect your data online. Think about public Wi-Fi. You're at a cafe, or in an airport, or even at the gym, and you're connecting to free Wi-Fi without a second thought. That free Wi-Fi is often a hacker's playground. With just a few clicks, someone can intercept your connection, steal your information, and even track your browsing habits. That's where Private Internet Access, or PIA, comes in. With Private Internet Access, you can safeguard all your online activities with military-grade encryption, protecting you from hackers, governments, and even your internet provider. Plus, they have a strict no-logs policy, which means they don't track or store any of your browsing history, so your privacy stays private. One click and you're protected. No complicated setup required. That's why we use Private Internet Access. Get 83% off and 4 months free using our link for a limited time. You can click the link in the description to try it out today.
You see, it all revolved around one of the biggest problems for PayPal when they were just getting started: fraud. A former marketing director called Eric Jackson wrote that the company was losing $2,300 every single hour to fraud at one point in its rise. At first, the company used the same methods as traditional banks to try and stop it, but the international, digital, and instant nature of the service they offered made this untenable in the long run, and so they needed some Silicon Valley innovation. One new method was the early adoption of what we now know as capture technology. While offering little resistance for regular users, it was a big hurdle for malicious bots and cyber attacks the company had lost so much money to before. But the one that really caught Peter Thiel's interest was called Igor, after a scammer who had taunted the company very early on in its history. By analyzing small details and detecting almost imperceptible patterns in the data from new users, Igor could detect likely fraudsters and pass that info on to PayPal's employees. This one program laid the groundwork for a company that would change the face of the entire world, and it was all down to the way that they solved the problem. PayPal, unlike the entrenched banking world, had access to all of their data in one place. The issue was that they had far too much of it to make sense of. The digital transactions, the endless details of how much was sent and where and who by and the patterns it created, it was all far too much information for a human mind to make sense of. But with PayPal, all of this was in one place, and they had used new technology to make sense of it. But other companies and institutions had multiple databases, lots of different types of information, all separate from each other. And so it was nearly impossible for them to get real accurate information from it all and turn it into an actionable strategy. And that's where Peter Thiel would come in. His idea was relatively simple really. He would use his newfound millions to create the best and most efficient data analysis company on the planet. It wasn't a unique idea at the time, of course, but the way that Peter Thiel went about creating it was. While other Silicon Valley types, and even his ex-colleagues in the PayPal mafia, stayed within the Silicon Valley bubble, he chose to branch out. His new company Palantir wasn't going to take the same steps that other companies would. Founded in 2003, they were going to blend two very different, almost antagonistic worlds together. The first sign of this was who Peter Thiel and his other partners chose as the new CEO for the company, a man called Alex Karp. From the outside in, Alex doesn't look anything like the standard Silicon Valley CEO template. Instead of a computer science degree from Harvard, he had a philosophy PhD from Frankfurt. He's also eccentric, or at least that's the image he likes to put forward, with his long, wiry grey hair and obsession with Tai Chi. But what's most different about him is his politics. Coming from one of the most left-leaning philosophy courses in the world, and having studied under some of the most prominent academic Marxists, you wouldn't expect him to be running a company like Palantir. It strikes a stark contrast to Peter Thiel's public politics as well, as he professes to be an ardent libertarian. And then the circumstances only get stranger when you learn where Palantir really started with their business. In 2003, 2 years after the attacks, the atmosphere was still one of fear and aggression in America. Maybe Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and their fellow founders could take PayPal's anti-fraud framework and apply this to national security against similar threats. If they had actually done this before the attacks, they might have spotted the strange pattern of trained pilots taking flights into the US from high-risk countries, or the movements of known insurgents before the attacks themselves. Prevention beats a cure, and having the relevant information put in front of human operatives could have stopped the entire tragedy before it ever happened. And so you could see how this would be a very tantalizing opportunity for the US. But at first, nearly all of Palantir's early capital came from Thiel's own pockets, tens of millions over the first few years. Silicon Valley and private hedge funds laughed them out of their offices. While they did have the name recognition, nobody wanted to get involved with national security. In their eyes, it was an old, decrepit industry, a relic of a much more brutal, primitive world. Some of the only outside money came from what would end up being Palantir's most important investor, the CIA. Through their relatively new venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, the CIA kicked in a few million to get the ball rolling. Really, this paled in comparison to what Peter Thiel had paid in, but it was the contacts and the place in the industry that was really important. The vote of confidence meant Palantir was integrated into the establishment from the very beginning. Meanwhile, they brought an innovative new look at security problems that stunned most of the big names in the industry. These were the companies they were competing with, old names in the military-industrial complex like Lockheed Martin and Base Systems. While they had decades of experience and trust, they lacked the new coat of paint that Palantir's Silicon Valley origins gave them. Alex Karp's plan for the day-to-day running of the company pushed them further forward. It was a combination of classic Silicon Valley tech bro gimmicks mixed with ruthless efficiency and a cult-like dedication. Palantir offers famously low salaries, but it's the company culture that keeps people there. They have the same offerings of beanbags and video game consoles that other Silicon Valley companies do, but they also encourage incredibly long hours. And interestingly, Alex Karp put no focus whatsoever on sales, sending out the same people who made the software to pitch it to clients. With all of this talk of company culture though, it's really easy to underestimate the power they could theoretically wield. If a company or a government agency hired them, they were giving them access to all of the data they had. Palantir would feed it into their software and give them solutions they asked for. But did they store the data? What did they learn from it even if they didn't store it? Each client made Palantir's software smarter and made it see clearer. Knowledge is power, and Palantir turned data into knowledge. For the first few years, the company was almost entirely integrated with the CIA. They were both one of its biggest investors and its only client, drip-feeding it contracts as it slowly grew over time. Lots of this early work was based around in-house data management. The CIA already had plenty of information, they just needed someone to link together and consolidate their separate databases. Then the project expanded to their government organizations and Palantir integrated their information as well. All of this was then put into a unified platform, which government employees could easily access with the right clearance. Though the first real test came with the War on Terror, there's no other arena where data and knowledge is more important than military intelligence. It was especially true in the kinds of wars America was fighting where they lost far more men and vehicles to roadside IEDs than to enemy soldiers. Knowing who the insurgents were, the location of booby traps and where they were hiding was absolutely key. Palantir offered a solution. Using the data management technology they'd been developing, they could put together all the different sorts of information that the US was gathering. Drone footage, satellite imagery, reports from soldiers on the ground. It was all fed into their algorithms to figure out who was an innocent farmer and who was an enemy combatant. Palantir called it their God-Eye view. An account from Annie Jacobson's book First Platoon describes how this worked during the war in Afghanistan. Palantir had flagged what looked like an Afghan farmer because of one strange detail about him unlike most other Afghan farmers. He wore a purple hat. Over a period of weeks, an intelligence operative watched his daily movements, learning his patterns. At first, it did just seem too strange to be true, but then after seeing the man lay an IED by the roadside, it became clear he was working as an insurgent and a strike was scheduled. But when the day and opportunity came, something seemed off to the operative. The man they were tracking looked and seemed the same, but he was acting very slightly differently. If it was up to the software, he would have been blown sky high, but the operative knew something was off. Even though he was still wearing the purple hat, he just wasn't acting like he usually did. Just minutes before the final call had to be made, the real target emerged from his home and confirmed the operative's suspicions. The person they'd been tracking the entire day was someone completely different, someone completely innocent. With just moments to spare, the operative called off the strike. And it's these kinds of mistakes that were dangerously common at first. When they rolled back the tape, it turned out that a glitch in the camera system they had used made a different man's hat look purple, and that had caused the confusion. But over time, Palantir's systems got much more sophisticated. Soon, they began being able to accurately predict people's future movements. We know of all of this because someone in the loop talked about it after the fact, but we don't know how many mistakes they usually make or think they made. The data is just obviously not publicly available to us, but it hasn't stopped this technology developing incredibly quickly, and the effects are harder to see. Palantir may have well prevented lots of bad things from happening, but it might have also caused lots of them as well. All the mistakes they made and the patterns they saw led to real-world actions. Soldiers almost certainly interrogated innocent civilians because the system flagged them as untrustworthy. Harsh measures in military force will have made regular people more bitter and angry, pushing them towards insurgency. There's nothing to gain in making something more efficient if the war itself is useless and endless anyway, only creating more conflict later on. An endless series of wars is perfect for Palantir though, as it lets them test out their gadgets in various war zones across the world, optimizing their system to be as deadly and accurate as possible. And today, we can commonly find it in use in Ukraine and Gaza. And now, most of the job is just done by AI, with very little human intervention or decision required. A kind of chatbot-style program provided by Palantir offers up suggestions to commanders like a waiter making recommendations off a wine list. But they're also now getting into hardware, building AI-powered tanks and other weapon systems. And with the world going in the direction it currently is, it's absolutely no wonder why everyone's now talking about them and their stock has shot up dramatically. As this technology and integration with the US deep state would be enough by itself to make Palantir incredibly powerful. But it definitely isn't enough for Alex Karp, Teal, or Palantir. Instead, they decided to turn their gaze inwards to use the same surveillance technology on the home front. Using these same systems, Palantir has been an essential partner of police forces across the West for years now. They've been most famous for their software that lets police departments engage in something known as predictive policing. In the same way that Palantir predicted which Afghan farmers were insurgents, they can also predict which regular people are involved with crime. Based on all the data that police forces have about people, they can draw up district or city-wide maps of where crime is likely to occur. They can then suggest patrol routes, where to station officers, and even which people to arrest. These systems often do nothing to actually counteract the inherent bias in the data they're given. When police patrol more often in a given area, they find more crime and make more reports. That then gets fed into the system, which tells the police to invest more resources into that specific high-crime area. But this is definitely not the worst part of the system though. You see, Vice obtained documents given by Palantir to a California police force they had a contract with in 2016, and the details were shocking. With their easy-to-use system, a police officer could simply type someone's name in and learn a staggering amount of information about them. Palantir would tell them what their email address was, their phone number, their date of birth, and their address. With just a license plate number, it could look at footage from public CCTV and figure out specific locations you'd been over a period of years, building up a complete pattern of movement. It could even link you to other people you spend time with and find out info on them as well. This is an invaluable tool in the hands of someone looking to control people. Both Orwell and 1,000 historical dictators couldn't have dreamed of a more effective tool for keeping track of their people's movements, patterns, and inner private lives. So aren't we lucky that our leaders are so much more responsible and trustworthy? Unfortunately, it isn't just policing either. Palantir has gotten its claws into every level of government. In the UK, the National Health Service recently signed a deal to hand over the entirety of their data, a treasure trove of medical records and patient info, to Palantir. And the laughable thing is that they don't get paid for this. In fact, it's the UK taxpayers that are paying Palantir $500 million to manage and analyze this for the government. This data, which should have remained private anyway, is invaluable for fighting future pandemics and assessing how effective different treatments are. Experts have described this as being one of the most valuable resources the UK had. The US had nothing to compare because of its separated private healthcare system. It's like Saudi Arabia paying a private company to take their oil off their hands. And now it's in Palantir's hands, along with all the confidential patient data that came along with it. The irony of all of this is that Palantir's biggest investor, founder, and shareholder, Peter Thiel, is keen on advertising how libertarian he really is. He pays lip service to the talking points on podcasts, makes a splash in political circles by donating to Republicans, and he was the first big name from Silicon Valley to jump on the Trump train.
We're voting for Trump because we judge the leadership of our country to have failed. Now that someone different is in the running, someone who rejects the false, reassuring stories that tell us everything is fine.
But the fact is, though, that this all runs completely counter to what he does and who he really is. He literally owns the company that's pioneering the new deep state, an unholy union between Silicon Valley privacy invasion and deep state power. It isn't just taking over the world, it already has. And now Palantir is coming out of the shadows with the IPO and their public contracts with big banks and corporations. All of Karp and Thiel's political theatrics are a smokescreen for their true place in the power structure. The maintenance and extension of the surveillance state is a bipartisan issue for them, one of the only things they agree on. Those in power, be they Democrats or Republicans, Labour or Conservatives, are always pushing it a little bit further. This is why Palantir has grown so quickly and will grow even larger over time. They fit right into the same moldy old power structure, increasing its reach into people's lives. Meanwhile, they profit from conflict, chaos, and fear. Even their name makes reference to this, Palantir. In The Lord of the Rings, the Palantir were magical orbs which could be used to see things across great distances, like an all-seeing eye. Alex Karp insists that the company's role is to protect the Shire.
The way you dominate the future is you dominate the present. I want America to be American in 1,000 years.
And they often boast about all the tragedies they prevented over the years, but people never asked for their sinister protection. We don't even know the extent of how much freedom we've lost because of all of this. Meanwhile, both Karp and Thiel have enriched themselves to the tune of billions of dollars, and the stock market is going absolutely crazy for Palantir.